Hi, Gerald. How are you doing?
I'm very good, Adam. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, sure. Because I'm really curious. What was your first computer?
Ooh, uh, 386, I believe. I had SimCity on there and some motorbike racing game. It was kind of like the computer I inherited from my mom's cousin, who got a 486 or whatever. I knew very little about it. He gave me the commands to play those games.
Okay, so the only reason was to play games, right? Was the beginning.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
And what was
exactly.
the transition to something more serious, like scripting or whatever, not gaming?
I think I really got into computers. I was heavy into computer games when I was in school, and I think when I actually got into the industry, or the reason why I got into the industry is I actually wanted to write computer games, which
Huh.
never happened. But that kind of got me curious. I was very curious about, it's like, how can it be that you push a button on the keyboard and something changes on the screen? How does this
Hmm.
physically work, right? It's like, because, like, yeah, we talk about zeros and ones and this, but it's all electricity, etc. That's sort of like what really got me interested. And at first, I was actually very interested in hardware, but sort of luckily, more by coincidence, went then into software rather than hardware. So it's like in the beginning, I was like, this was like late .com boom. Like overclocking your CPUs was still cool, and building your own PCs was still cool. So got a little bit into that. But then sort of, yeah, as I was more curious, it's like, okay, what a graphic card is and whatever, and how you plug this all together. It's like, but the software controls it. Well, this is interesting. How do you type something on a keyboard and it makes the computer do something? And that was
Hmm.
somewhere around 16, 17, 15, 16, 15, 16 that I started in, scripting, programming, etc.
How you started with DOS or what was it?
Yeah, it was Windows. That time was like 98, I believe, or something. I mean, I kind of started with Windows from 3.11 to 95, 98, 2000. But I think at that time it was like 98 or whatever. And, the kind of, yeah, was the first things was, DOS shell scripting, which is maybe not quite a form of programming. People argue it is or it isn't. And then I did an apprenticeship as a programmer, as informatica in Austria. That's where I then started actually
Where was
serious
it?
programming.
Where was it in Austria?
My neighbor town, actually, a 10-minute commute. I miss these days. From Upper Austria, like a small town called Kammerstetten, just north of Linz, the capital of Upper Austria. And I worked at Eidenberg, which was the neighbor town of Kammerstetten, like one town further away from Linz. Uh, and that was a small, what you would call a startup back then. We were 6 or 8 people. Um, they started sorry, not 2000, 98. I joined in 2001. Of course, back then startup wasn't cool. We would say like, yeah, it was a small kind of little company. Not none of the big exciting ones, but a small one. And they built ERP system. They're actually still around, so
Hmm.
it's kind of really cool.
Last year I was in Linz an enterprise Java user group, and
Ah,
the
yeah.
interesting part is it was in an old tobacco factory,
Oh, yes, yeah.
and this is huge. So it was amazing how big it was, and I was told that in the building there were lots, how to call it, like they this was like production line, and it
Hmm.
moved around, so it was huge. They are completely overestimated, the size of a cigarettes or tobacco factory. I don't even know what it was. I forgot actually the brand, but and now it looks great because it is like a startup area. So there were lots of small companies and coffees, and but it was actually yeah, a nice piece of Linz.
Yeah, I remember the days when it was a cigarette factory. Yeah, you would get cigarettes out of it.
A cigarette, okay.
Yeah. I mean, all sorts of, it's like cigarettes. I'm not sure whether they made cigars, but yeah, they would get tobacco and basically make products out of it. And yeah, it's like I've never been in a new building. I kind of left before. It stood empty for quite a while. They closed it down when I was still sort of little. And I actually even have two acquaintances friends of my parents or acquaintances of my parents who worked in there back then. But then they closed it down, moved production somewhere else. It was empty for quite a while. And now I hear it's kind of like many startups in there, it's event spaces or something like that. But I've never managed to go in there myself just yet. So one day.
So you have to talk at the enterprise Java user group. So this is the likelihood is high that you will end up talking there. So it was last. They rebooted the enterprise Java user group after Corona, the last year.
Oh,
so
yeah,
they invited me.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, really cool. So lots of thing happens in Linz actually. So interesting.
Yeah, I mean the big thing now is Dynatrace obviously has a massive campus, right? I mean, there's various software companies have been there before and still are there, but by now I think by and large it's Dynatrace who's probably the most prominent or one of the most prominent software companies there, and that's because the founder Bernd Greifeneder, he is from Linz or the area from up Austria. I have quite a few friends there now working at Dynatrace who we were working together before at a different company. And then you have this influx of the university is quite good. The Johannes Kepler University has quite some software engineering courses. And then you have the Fachhochschule Hagenberg, which is not too far away from Linz. That also has software engineering. So if you have somewhat of a gravitational point towards Linz when it comes to software engineering, which is great because before that time in the 60s, 70s, 80s, Linz was more of an industrial city and there was a massive steel factory there and so forth. But that has all kind of changed quite a bit. It's quite a bit of a software engineering hub now.
And your first job at the RP startup company, which programming language you started actually back then? You remember?
Yeah, I do remember. So at the company, we used Oracle database and a lot of PLSQL, and the front end was coded in something that back then was called Centura. That was like a sort of a 4GL, I'm not even sure how to describe it, like an all built-in software environment. So you basically would use the Centura application and write code in that application, and that would compile an exe file for you. So it was like IDE and compiler all in one. That changed name a couple of times. It was called SQL Windows at some point as well, and was specifically built for building front-end apps to Oracle databases, actually. And, that was there. I had no say or choice in that matter, so I just joined the company 3 years in. And, that's kind of how I started learning PLSQL and Centura. Then during the apprenticeship in school and various projects, we got exposed to C first and C++ and Java and PHP to some extent. There was a bit of a PHP hype in the mid 2000s for a brief moment. But yeah, that's sort of like those programming languages. But I would say the very first programming language really that I used was PLSQL and SQL alongside with that, if you want to call it a programming language.
But what I remember, around the time, I also did a project, interestingly, with Oracle Forms. So I could build applications with just drawing text fields and binding them to SQL, basically. And what I remember, there was an author. It was almost an idol. And I think the name was Feuerstein. Could it be?
Oh, yeah.
He wrote lots of books about PLSQL, I remember.
Yes.
So he had like a rock star status back then. And I was curious about PLSQL. So I knew Java already, but everyone was excited about PLSQL. And this was actually a serious language. So they had packages, right? I remember it was like a module. So so it was you could build nice things. And I have a chat with architect. They even had a multi-layer PLSQL architecture. So it was actually it sounded, because at the beginning I only thought this is just for stored procedures. And it turned out it was actually, you could do whatever you like with that, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it has, procedures, functions, packages, exception handling is in it. Yeah, it's based on Ada is the kind of the sort of the mother language, if you like. So it was when it was implemented back in the 80s or something that Oracle got PLSQL support. It was based on that. It still is. So the language syntax looks very familiar to Ada. But yeah, now you can do pretty much everything except really UI. That's the only thing where PLSQL you will not get anywhere. But yeah, no, it's great for. I mean, the PLSQL was and still is to a large extent heavily used in the financial industries and the existing systems.
So it's still
forth.
popular, right? PLSQL.
It's still, yeah, I mean, it's still popular. It's like, is it as popular as JavaScript, Python, Java? No. I mean, if you look at any of the language indexes, right, it's by far has disappeared. Is it still in use? It's more in use than what people would think, right? But similarly, you can say from C, right? C is still popular. Well, people argue, is it still heavily used? Yes, and PLSQL as well. And Oracle still enhances it as well. So it's not like it's kind of, it's stood still. And it's really, there's obviously the bigger question is always, at least what I always get is like, logic in the database or outside the database. Right?
Yeah, this is what I wanted to tell you now, to ask you, because for me there are two strategies, right? So just treat a database as a dumb data store. It's just use SQL standard and nothing else, or really just use just put as much logic as possible to database and just use the database actually. And both strategies are fine. What's really not good is try to decouple with database and be dependent on it. So this is the worst possible strategy. But
yes.
I was always curious about, because I saw lots of projects who used PLSQL and they were successful. And why they were successful? Because, the logic could it was basically in the database and it was very efficient to get access to data. And if you are outside the database, you have to be more careful what you are doing. So this was why I was curious about PLSQL and, successful architectures back then. Okay, what happened about after your ERP startup days?
Yeah, I said, I really didn't think of it like as a startup back then. But afterwards, I was there for a couple of years. I finished my apprenticeship there. I then moved on to, so I gained quite a bit of Oracle database knowledge in the process of, writing a lot of PLSQL, and because we were such a small team, you sort of also were the admin and the support guy and the documentation guy and everything, really. After that, I kind of wanted to get, have a bit of a change of scenery, so to say. And I focused more on performance tuning for databases. And I joined a company called Golden Source in Linz. It was an American company that had a development center in Linz. And there I joined as basically Oracle database performance specialist. So during the startup days, I kind of focused a bit more on performance. We had very little knowledge about that, and kind of found it very interesting. Still do find performance tuning very interesting, right? This kind of goes back to again, this how do things work, and why do things work faster in a certain way than other ways. And that was back then a big J2E shop, and it was called J2E, right? Back then they were moving their entire application infrastructure from C++ to Java 1.5.
When was it? Which year was it?
2007 is when I joined there.
Okay. And which database you used in the ERP company? Which version? Remember that?
So it was always Oracle. My first version was 8.15, and we upgraded to 8.17. That was sort of like the first one I touched was 8.15. Technically, I touched 8.05, but the company was in the process to go to 8.17, which was like the long-term, the terminal patch set release. So the latest patch set for the release version. And that is really the one where I got my my feet in the water, my fingers wet on the database version. It was an interesting
8i.
time.
Was it called already 8i, right?
So the change from 8 to 8i happened between 8.0 and 8.1, yes.
Because back then, there was a story that the I was actually 1, right? So and someone said, okay, they read it as the 1 as an I, and this is how the name happened. So this was
So I don't think that's true. I was, now obviously I work for Oracle, so it was quite interesting. We just renamed 23C to 23AI, and my executive vice president, who was around back then, I asked him, why did Oracle ever do this whole letter business? Because until 8, there was no letter there. And he told me an interesting story of how Larry Ellison was a good friend of Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs came out with the iPod and everything and nobody, or I at least don't know yet what the I actually stands for in all the Apple stuff. And Larry Ellison back then was very much about the internet. It's like the database for the internet, etc. And he kind of sort of took the idea from Steve Jobs. But I have not heard the story that they thought it was 8-1 and somebody mistook the 1 for an I.
Yeah, this is what I heard, but this was like, stories from Germany, right? So who knows? This is too far away. And there was IFS. You remember IFS was the attempt, to put IFS to the file system to a database. And I also evaluated the Aurora, if you remember.
Oh, wow. Okay, interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and Aurora was the attempt to run, Java natively in the database and write, stored procedures in Java. Yeah. And those were exciting times back then.
Yeah, and believe it or not, you still can write Java in the database as a stored procedure as well.
But even with GraalVM now, right? This is GraalVM based now.
No, Java is not yet. This is a port from the JDK. We call it OJVM, Oracle JVM. So you always find a lot of O letters in Oracle products. GraalVM is the JavaScript part of it. So when GraalVM came out, we call it the multilingual engine because GraalVM has this promise that we can run multiple languages.
It works actually. So it not only promise it actually works. So that you have Python, JavaScript, and Java, and they even interact with each other, right?
Right, exactly. And so so JavaScript now came out 2 years ago. So JavaScript stored procedures in Oracle are based on GraalVM, and we are looking currently into Python. And the idea was having a separate engine and executing it in the same runtime, and to some extent even fighting for the same resources is quite inefficient also from an engineering standpoint. So like when you look at the OJVM implementation, because it is a port of the JDK, because it happened before Sun was part of Oracle and so forth, it's an engineering effort every time we bite that overhead, right? We have to take the JDK and port it to OJVM, etc. And then, of course, the Oracle database has quite a lot of nifty, interesting capabilities built in that sort of explains why it is so good for what it does. Like it does its own scheduling, it does its own memory management. It's not like
almost like an operating system, right?
It is actually, yes. So it's actually the fundamental layer underneath that does all this stuff we call VOS, which is short for virtual OS. And, from what I can tell, that was implemented because, back then in the good old days in the 80s and 90s, Oracle ran on Linux, and Linux was, they came in 93, but Solaris and Windows and AIX and whatever. And it was just, from an engineering standpoint, much, much better and beneficial to implement an abstraction layer that does, that deals with the actual intrinsicies of memory management, scheduling, etc., and then only have to worry about the underlying OS or platform from that abstraction layer, rather than blindly relying on each OS and how it does it differently, and you get completely different experience, right, to some extent. So that with GraalVM was quite interesting. It's like it was, when the GraalVM guys came in, they were like, yeah, we want, a couple of gig of memory from the database and then do our own memory management. And we were like, nope, that's not what you're going to do. you actually have to integrate with our memory management facilities, because we really don't want to have two memory managers competing with each other and not knowing of each other either, right? So that was quite interesting. And the GraalVM guys did a fantastic job, are doing a fantastic job. So we'll see more there and eventually more languages as well.
Completely off topic about the Graal, no, not completely, but I was in contact also on podcast with Alfonso, who is also from GraalVM team. And what he did is crazy. So he was able in Java to natively call this meta model Llama 3 from Java without Python, without C, Java 21 plain and vector API, and he calls the model and it runs. And this is huge. I say, hey, Oracle just give you resources, because for enterprises this is huge. Now we can integrate open source LLM without anything, right? So it just runs without, and is stable. And you could even integrate it to Oracle database, right? For fraud detection or whatever. So it's pretty useful. Crazy stuff. And okay, so back to you. So you joined the American company, and
Yes.
my question escalated, with AI, but it was interesting. So and what you and you said you did some J2E back then. They migrated from C++ to J2E, right?
Yes, exactly. So I joined as a database performance expert and very quickly found out not the accurate number, but felt 80% of the performance problems had nothing to do with the database, but more like with the code that was written to use the database. And the typical like, don't fetch data, don't fetch 1,000 rows from a table and then loop over it on the
Yeah.
application tier. Fetch one by one, because you will have 1,000 round trips on the network. It's neither the application is slow nor the database is slow. You're just spending your time on the network, and a lot of these things. And back then, I'm forever grateful to my colleagues back then. They actually spent so I knew I had to kind of approach the Java. The J2E application that was being written back then, right? It was heavily based, not heavily based on our main application server was WebLogic. We did WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss. WebLogic was certainly our go-to application server then, before Oracle bought BEA. Because I joined sort of as a database performance engineer, I had no credibility in the Java space. It's like first they thought I was like another DBA, right? So to kind of establish a bit like, no, guys, I'm a software engineer, right? Just with an affinity and kind of appreciation for performance tuning and Oracle database. But I know how to write code. I've learned this stuff and so forth. But I don't really know much Java. And there were quite a few of really good Java guys there that we had, that were either studying or finished from LTKU, from the Johannes Kepler University and other areas. And, I'm forever grateful. They actually spend a lot of time sort of getting me closer to Java, right? And still like my heap memory analysis capabilities, or, thread dumps and so forth, like the very early diagnostic things that you would learn with Java, right? Garbage collection, it's like full or just new generation and so forth. That all goes back to those guys telling me, right? Sitting down with me and explaining me all that stuff. And that was a really good collaboration or, kind of work environment, because the meantime, I taught them a lot about database or the Oracle database anyway, right? So it's like, what is a soft parse, a hard parse in the database? Don't concatenate your SQL strings, use variables. It's bind variables, as we call them in Oracle. It's very important for the database side and so forth. And so that was really good. And yeah, that was a couple of years there. And then I moved to the US headquarters in New York City. I was basically into consulting and rather than. So
and you enjoyed that? You enjoyed it in New York, or you missed?
So both, I guess.
Okay.
So I was, because I kind of I did this apprenticeship and got into the industry, not like in the usual mid-20s. When you come out of the university, I got to go to New York when I was like 22, 23. And that was in 2009. There was like this credit bump. It wasn't quite a crisis, but prices just dropped with all the stuff that happened in 2008. And so I could afford also to live in Manhattan. And, it's like a 23-year-old in Manhattan, that was fun. And also the job was interesting. It's like, so in Austria, I was responsible for making sure the new version of the application performs well. So, I was part of this performance team that continuously profiled new versions, new drops of the application.
How fast was it? So what was your goal? Like 100 transactions per second, or more like,
no, it wasn't the thousands, but yeah, no. So what we focused on mostly was the application was like a reference data cleansing system. So the reference data that banks would use from Bloomberg, Reuters, etc. Apparently there's like everywhere, like a huge issue with data consistency. It's like, is the data correct and so forth. So banks will rely on Bloomberg, Reuters to give them that data, and they would drop the change deltas every night. And one of the main tasks really for this performance thing was making sure, quite boring, to that the batch windows would not go into the day. So how can you load and refresh the data as fast as possible? The day job was then the data analysts kind of entering data. That we were out of the picture for that. But our kind of the software part that we engineered in Linz was the backend system of all of that, housing all the data, importing new data, change deltas, and so forth. And so we were kind of always very much focusing on that. For whatever reason, I sometimes actually was kind of a question why we never really care about the data analyst during the day, whether his save takes like 3 seconds or 15 seconds. But for whatever reason, the company didn't seem this as important. So it was more like, how much can we suck data into the database?
Okay.
And those were basically CSV files back then to a large extent. Some delivered in XML, no JSON yet, right? But mostly was CSV based data.
But CSV is back, right? So in the cloud, CSV is highly in use right now.
I think CSV never disappeared. And probably
no, but now it's a revival.
Right?
I would say, like 5 to 10 years ago, it was not very, how to call it,
fashionable.
Yeah, exactly, fashionable to use CSV, and now it is back.
So absolutely. Yeah. But I mean, don't you feel like also we have a little bit also sort of reliving the XML days of the early 2000s, also with JSON. Everything has to be JSON and JSON and JSON. And then
JSON is okay, but the YAML is a little bit problematic, right? So
yeah, I mean, like I already got conversations where like, oh, we need JSON schemas now because we have to validate that data, right? It's like I guess
as we got binary XML back then. It was everyone wanted to have XML, and then as I was too slow, then
yeah, exactly, right?
Binary XML, then it was faster but not readable. So
exactly. And 50 ways to shoot yourself in the foot, right? With style sheets and transformation and. So at least we haven't gotten that way, but it's like CSV is probably the simplest format, right? It's like, I mean, it's readable. There's only one character delimiter, or like cell and the 2 character, I guess, for the new line, depending which OS you use. But it's pretty much. That's probably not get much simpler. So that's why I also think it will never really disappear, because the world.
No, it will not disappear. And I think CSV is okay because it's simple. Everything else is questionable, right? So you have to justify it, but CSV is okay. Yeah. So what you did in your Manhattan? So you obviously, you or why you moved out of Manhattan? Because the prices got higher after 2009?
No, actually, because that company that I worked for didn't do so well, and they offshored everything into Asia, and also
the beginning of the end.
Yeah, exactly, and that was pretty much it. And my visa was company bound, and I didn't really I didn't move anyway to be away from Austria. I just thought this was a nice year, in a foreign country, and it almost were 3 years. But at some stage, I was like, okay, I need to find another job. I want to leave on my own terms, and not on, when they tell me I have no longer a job, then you have 2 weeks to leave the country. And so I started looking into going back to Austria. But in the meantime, I've made contacts to Oracle, because we were using Oracle database also as the predominant backend for our software in that company. I got to do a couple of proof of concepts with Oracle on their Exadata machines. And one of them happened to be in London. I was over there for 3 weeks, and, kind of kept contact with the Oracle guys that back then did the POC with me. And when I wanted to leave, or when I decided to leave New York, I wanted to go home, and I emailed one of them and said, hey, do you have a job in Oracle Austria by any chance? It's like, or can you connect me to somebody? It's like, I didn't really want to go home and then start looking for a job. And that person was actually then telling me, we're looking for somebody here in the UK. This was still when the UK was in the European Union, so it was super simple to go over there. So he was like, don't you want to, why don't you come over and, to the UK? And I thought to myself, wow, okay, that was not on the horizon, but basically was then 3 years in London. And I was, London is okay. And it's practically the same time zone. And there were cheap Ryanair flights from London directly to Linz. So that was all really good. And so I relocated to the UK. And at least that way, my relocation was both times paid by the companies that I relocated for. I thought, that's all good. And, from the UK, then it's easy to go to Austria from there. But that obviously never happened either, or maybe not obviously for the listeners. But then I kind of went to San Francisco after that. And
why that? Because you didn't like London anymore?
Because in London I was I joined pre-sales. And so already in New York, I kind of had I was no longer development. I was more in the consulting branch. Back then I was responsible to go to customers, and so in Austria we kind of were responsible for making sure the new version of the software is on par with the performance expectations we had. In New York, it was going to customers and troubleshoot environment issues, which was really interesting and fun for a while, but kind of wears off as well when every so often you have to yet again spend a Saturday somewhere, to tune a system or something. For sometimes trivial things, it's like like one story was like back then this was still a 32-bit JDK, and we knew for a fact that if you had a connection pool of 100 and a statement cache of 100, so 100 times 100, there's like 2 point something gig would be occupied just by prepared statement hanging in the heap. And we knew that was just, I'm not quite sure whether it was exactly 2 gig or whatever, but it was enough that we knew that the application would not run anymore successfully. You would run into out of memories. And still remember a couple of times when I kind of walked in on a Saturday, sort of ruining my weekend. And, WebLogic, you could just adjust this at runtime. You didn't even have to restart like WebSphere. So you would go like, okay, statement cache 10, update, and the world was good. And you're like, okay, that was a waste of time. But anyway, so that was sort of also part of why I didn't really like that job per se anymore. In London, then I was pre-sales. I thought, it's like a foot into the door of Oracle, sort of almost go full circle, having started with Oracle database and PLSQL, now working for the company in the database kind of pre-sales department. That was a lot of fun that I really enjoyed, because we were basically we weren't the sales guys, we were the pre-sales guys who were responsible for, building PowerPoints and so forth, but also for doing demos and proof of concepts. So it was still technical, and it got an interesting challenge. It was London, so it was again very much financial industries background, which I already gained from my previous company in New York. But they would come to you, the bank would come to you, whatever, and say, yeah, we have problem X, and it's like, here's your toolkit, the software that you're selling. It's like, well, what could fit? And and I don't have to sell the software. That was not my job. So I could actually be honest and sit down and say, look, I think this is a solution or the right solution for the job. Look at it. And sometimes we got to do a couple of times POCs. That was really, really nice.
So you learned a lot, I think, if you do this, because this is you have always a different problem, and
yes,
and it's fun. So you learn a lot, I would say, because
and you kind of get pushed into it, right? It's like, especially when you do a proof of concept, right? It's like there you are on your own. I mean, you can ask questions, whatever, but you don't have the luxury to just wait for some product manager or somebody to respond how to fix the issue, right? You're there with the customer, and back then when we were still all in person. And you had to do it. You had to fix it and get it working somehow. So it's very, very interesting, very versatile. Very, as you said, it's always a different problem. That was super interesting, and actually I liked that a lot. But then my previous manager now, product management in Oracle, they kind of I got once exposure to headquarters, to Redwood Shores. And she met me, and she was like, hey, most of the product managers we have in Oracle database are actually more like DBA kind of background. It's like, we run big production systems and so forth, but you're different. You're kind of like this developer guy who happens to know the database really well. It's like you can hold your ground with the DBA kind of stuff, but you identify yourself as a developer. We're looking for somebody like that, and do you not want to come to San Francisco? And that was back in 2015, and I was like, it was just before I had the big 3 in front, and I was, Silicon Valley. If you're already in IT, it's like you gotta try. I had one colleague in pre-sales who was close to retirement. His name was Eric, and he also was like, yeah, I did it for a couple of years. It's good to have experienced it, and it's like, why not? And so relocated for Oracle to San Francisco, and I'm still here.
Okay.
It's almost 10 years later.
But and what you like New York, London, or San Francisco the most?
Yeah, I get always or Linz, of course. I always get the question, and I would always say it entirely depends on what you're after. So New York is really the city that never sleeps. Loved it for when I was 23, 24. It's like you could party all night. It's like it wouldn't stop. There was always something to do. I would not want to live there anymore, quite frankly, because it's sort of also quite exhaustive. certainly a city more like for the youngsters. I mean, there's plenty of people that obviously live there who are raised families and so forth. But for me, it was a lot of fun while I was young and going out a lot. But it's a tiny apartment in Manhattan, really ridiculously expensive. Okay, not much different from San Francisco these days, but anyway, right, like that kind of lifestyle, a very fast-paced lifestyle. When I moved to London, which was, as I said before, not really on the horizon, I sort of actually only realized standards. Like London is a lot more, how should I say, it's also fast-paced, but not as fast-paced, and it has a little bit more, I want to say, cultural background. So it's like in New York, so when I say cultural background, I mean like from the things you do. It's like in New York, you get everybody from the world who is in New York to make it big, sort of, right? It's like, yes, you got to New York, that's the big city, that's what's happening, and etc. London, you get some of that, but you also get like the average guy from Kent who happens to live in Shoreditch and just has a job and happily wants to play football with you on Saturday and go hang out at the river and go to this kind of afternoon tea thingy, whatever. So you like that I never really had in New York. New York was, and maybe also because of an age gap, of course. It's like it was older in London than I was in New York. But New York was always much more like, either meet up for drinks, it was for some kind of fun, or you're working. And as that could easily be because, I was basically young then and that was what you did. London, I had more like a better work-life balance. And then San Francisco is interesting right now, right? It has had a huge hype while I was here from 2015 till 2019, and then a pandemic came. And now it's more like a lot of people have left. It's more like on the downside. The city itself is honestly could be cleaned up a bit better, right? It's like, I think the in terms of like just, there's a lot of shops closed, a lot of it just doesn't look very attractive anymore in that sense. But it's a beautiful city. And I used to live until the pandemic in the city. Now I'm in the Bay, so south of it. It has, its pros and cons. It's a beautiful city. It's very beautiful neighborhoods, but it's just gotten a bit crazy after COVID, and now I'm enjoying more like maybe it's just an age thing again. It's like now I'm enjoying more like being south, and yesterday we just drove to the beach south and hung out a bit, and it's more like suburban life. But it's like if you're young, definitely New York, absolutely. If you want I want to say variety, and not just like I made more friends in London than I ever did in New York. I said New York people go there to make it big and whatever, and of course people come and go, and do have the same in London. But in London, you have more than just that. So it's like, friends I made in London, I still have quite solid bonds. So that has a much better work-life balance. San Francisco, also really nice, actually really nice if you like outdoors. California is beautiful, and the surroundings of California if you like outdoors. Of course, very far away from home for me now. And, like Austria is still near and dear to me. It's like actually I've explored more of Austria ever since I've left than ever before. Probably also more an age thing, but I've got kind of like I've become an unofficial tourist guide for Austria. So if you ever happen to be there somewhere again, shoot me an email and I'll give you some tips of stuff you would, it's like largest ice caves in the world happen to be in Austria. I have no clue. But they're around Salzburg. It's like, so anyway, so near and dear to me as well. But, different, all cities are great.
And they're still as tourists as before Corona in San Francisco, or is also more quiet now?
It's quiet. It's coming back again. It's quieted down quite a bit, but it's coming back. But what you can tell more is that before Corona, everybody wanted to live in the city, and house prices exploded. Right now, it's actually the opposite. People have either left entirely or moved into the Bay, and house prices actually have gone down. I mean, it will not last, of course, but house prices have gone down for first time ever that I've been here in San Francisco, and it's not like the place you want to be anymore. It's more like the youngsters, of course, they want to be there again because everything south and around San Francisco is very suburban right away, right again, as America tends to be often. But it's kind of, you can tell, and you can tell other, like we just spoke yesterday again. You must know the Westfield Mall in San Francisco, right? Whenever you're over there, now that's on the way of, closing out. So it's like the Westfield has basically tried to sort of get rid of the building. Many shops have closed. So now you actually, if you want to go to a big shopping mall, it's no longer the shopping mall in San Francisco. You work yourself. So that kind of stuff that just makes it a little bit less.
But the Apple Store is
attractive.
still there, I guess, right?
The Apple Store, it's a good question. I haven't been on market for a long time. I need to check.
Yeah, this would be interesting.
I really need to check. The Whole Foods closed down, like the biggest Whole Foods in San Francisco, they closed down. And they closed down because of theft, basically. So anyway, it's like, San Francisco is still a beautiful city, but it will come back. It's like its usual, things pendle and both directions.
So what you did the 10 years in San Francisco for Oracle, or what was your, trajectory? What was your job?
So I came over as a product manager, so back into development, deciding more on the features and roadmap of the product. Back then, there was a big push, there still is, to attract developers to use Oracle database technology. Like with the good old microservices architecture that is now over 10 years old, no longer even. There was obviously or maybe not obviously, but there was this proliferation of technologies, right? Like this notion of like every microservice used the right tool for the right job, and kind of very quickly multiplied to use the right database for the job and so forth. And there's a lot of databases out there. It's actually really, really interesting to be in the database space currently, like the last 10 years. It's more interesting than it was in the mid 2000s when there was like Oracle SQL Server, MySQL or something. Now you find everything and everywhere, right? It's like now we have vector databases again. But anyway, so I came as a product manager. I'm still in a product management role, but now they've given me people. I don't know why. Well, they thought it was good or bad. I don't know. But I have an amazing team. And there are different jobs in the team. I have a couple of developer evangelists that do an amazing job of actually showing people how you can use, Oracle with Java or what have you, right? And how you can make your code work. I have some solid product managers who define roadmaps, define features, functional specifications, and so forth, driving functionality into the database. We had a lot of that happening in the last release. I have also the ACE program under me. The Oracle ACE program is an external advocacy program that Oracle had for many, many, many years. And that somehow ended up under me. And I was always very keen on the ACE program. I was always very big supporter. Like before I was at Oracle, I always wanted to be an ACE. I never quite made the cut. I was also different days back then.
I was ACE director.
Oh, really? Were you? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, but then something happened because I was supposed, to be for the Java and the Glassfish or whatever. And then in the end, it was not that, strategic anymore. So I think I'm no more. They wanted to transition me to not ACE director. There was something else. But I don't know. I just back then...
Yeah, groundbreaker ambassador.
Groundbreaker, exactly. And I was Java champion, and I was the ACE director. Yeah. Maybe I am still, but I was for sure. So I have to check it, right?
Yeah, that predates me. So that it has gone through a couple of changes. Indeed, there was like briefly this groundbreaker ambassador program that I folded into the ACE program again. There's no exclusion, no silos. It's all one big family. So every groundbreaker ambassador was made an ACE essentially, or joined the ACE program if they wanted to. But yeah, so that's under me as well. And yeah,
so you are the master of the evangelist for Oracle database. Can it's what?
Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of people that do a lot of good things, especially in the last couple of years. It's like the executive management level has seen by now. When I came over in 2015, it's like MongoDB was just around for 2-3 years or something, or maybe a bit longer, or got popular then, right? JSON and all this good stuff. But Docker only came in 2016, making it easier for getting technology. So there was back then a big kind of like question mark of whether whether this is actually any kind of concern for our install base and for people using it. I think by now we have seen that no, it is sort of, a concern for us. I mean, developers do have a choice, and more often than not, they choose other technologies. And
Mm-hmm.
just this morning I had to juggle off this bill for misinformation. It's like this morning I was made aware of a tweet from I guess I can say it, from a MongoDB guy who claimed, it's like JSON and Postgres is super slow and MongoDB is so much better for it, etc. And I looked at it and we already ran it internally, and we was like, no, we're faster. And there's also quite a few Postgres guys now that go like, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, etc. You should never do quick and dirty benchmarks.
Yeah.
And then put them on Twitter if you're not prepared to get the backlash. But it's like they have seen this now, and by now we have quite a lot of people that actually want to evangelize. We've actually also had people from the WebLogic team coming over as well. And it's like, we tell Java guys how to use the database correctly, because there still is this. That doesn't mean that they don't know or whatever, but it still matters how you invoke an API, what you do, etc. Right, and the same is true for the database. And too many people think Oracle can only do relational, but we can do JSON also since 2013. Like any relational, if you still want to call it, that database can, right? It's like Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server. Everybody can do JSON.
But it's also a different world, right? So right now, if I would have to access database, I think plain JDBC is an option again, because we have Java 21 and Java 21 with Java records, with the modern syntax and with multi-line string. It is actually very nice to work directly with JDBC again. So you could actually write, you mentioned microservices. Also, it is you could have smaller modules which do one thing, and there's a lean code, very fast. So I would say there's also a different world, and there's also no time with data-oriented programming, for instance, right? Switch expressions. Mm-hmm. What you could do is you can have object relational mapping without object relational mapper, right? So you can just fetch data from the database and to a record, and then have a switch statement which picks whatever with destructuring, deconstruction is called, pick whatever is necessary, and then and forward to the client. But this is I think very important work, because I think developers are no more aware of Oracle. So this is what Postgres is huge, what I can tell you from enterprise. Mm-hmm. So it is now very important to evangelize again. Otherwise, people would think, okay, Oracle is just for huge companies and no more for us, right? So this is important work you are doing, because for Oracle, it's important, right? So and
we had several initiatives, and still other and more to come. But like most people don't know, we have a freebie version of Oracle database.
You started with JDBC was in Maven a few years ago, right? So this was a huge impact. So this was a small thing.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I got to learn. So I was quite in the middle of that decision. I got to know a lot of our what we call business practices people. Like other people call them lawyers. They actually don't see themselves that way, but that was an interesting one, yes. But that came in 2016-17, I believe. JDBC.
And Bruno Souza, he started with the Docker for Oracle, I remember.
Bruno Borges.
Borges. Yeah. Borges, not Souza.
Yes.
I always, sometimes I confuse both.
Yeah,
both of them. Yeah.
Exactly, both.
But the Bruno Souza is the one, Java one, with the Brazilian flag. So it was the most famous Java developer. Bruno Borges works now for Microsoft, but he was at Oracle back then. He was evangelist, and
he did actually. He got me to. You're right. He did the first Docker back then files, and he got me then to do one for Oracle database. He said, "Hey, look at this. I think this will be huge," and he was right. And we got me into this space, and that was also December 2016, we had the first Docker files back then, still for Oracle database. Now we have images pre-built. I do my own image as well. Some people may notice the name, but that's more of a hobby thing than anything.
Yeah, but last year it was still not available on ARM for Mac, I think, right? So
and it still isn't. We're working on that. So basically, the database in general is being ported to ARM. That's the holdup.
Because you have to support Ampere, right? So for the CP, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Ampere and Oracle Cloud and ARM is coming anyway. So it's like, it's already there. I think it's no longer a question. But as we said before, it's like there's a virtual operating system layer in the database. So the guys are quite eagerly working on the port right now, and
Mhm.
it takes some time. We don't want to just port it and, like performance is crap or something. So we port it and make sure that obviously it's the same behavior as on any other platform. And hopefully later this year we will have that port. But yeah, no, it's like I get weekly kind of GitHub issues and other stuff now about
Mhm.
Oracle database not running on Mac chips, sorry, M chips on Mac.
Mhm.
And all I can say is like, yes, we're working on it and it's actually high priority, but it's
Very
just
good. Because
porting
last year
takes a while.
I used my old Mac on Intel, and actually it was quite an achievement. What I had Oracle with Golden Gate, and how was called
Ah.
the log miner for CDC,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
with Kafka architecture. This is what I had to
Oh,
do.
cool.
Yeah, and it worked, but I was really sad. And the crazy story was I could use on ARM. It was like 90% done. After half an hour, everything looked right, and it didn't work. It's like this. It has to work. And I read the
Yeah.
internet, and it didn't. But you will notice at the end, if you try to run it on ARM, you are pretty far, and then it stops working. So this was the question, right?
Yeah, and we see all sorts of different. So like just last week, Spring AI got merged support for vector data type or vector store just last Friday, and that was blocked for a moment because the Spring engineer, the open source guy, a committer, couldn't run the regression tests or the unit tests on his Mac because it was an M1. But there it wasn't that it worked half an hour. It was like it died before the database even could start up. So as I see all sorts of different scenarios when it crashes, and or I don't know, I don't even know whether sometimes it crashes, but sometimes it does other things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's like all, you use Docker or Rancher or whatever and all this good stuff. And then which of the M chips is it? There's free now. But yeah, it's always very highly unreliable, unfortunately. But we do have an ARM port internally, the testing one, and that seems to work pretty well. And we are all or I'm on a couple of my colleagues and I are on a Mac, and I'm supposed to get my M1 in a month's time. So
yeah, hopefully M3.
M3,
no, not M1. M1 is the old one, right? So
M3, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I have to check actually. Yeah, they only refresh the specs every once a year, but maybe an M2. But I'll see what I can get the latest and greatest.
But one question, because I knew you. So I attended Java 1s always, but the Java 1s were in parallel to Oracle World, and as a Java 1 I was a speaker, so I'm not an attendee.
Yeah.
So I had special pass, and or maybe because I was Oracle director, so I also could enter the Oracle World. So open world. So I was very curious. So I was the entire time in Java 1. If there was a break, so I walk over to the Oracle World and attended some talks. But I knew your name. And for me, it was like Java 1 and Java. So you did something on Java 1 because I knew your name always. And the question is why I knew your name. Also, you were somehow associated with Java. So you did something with Java 1, right?
Okay. Yeah, I did. Yes, my Java 1 engagement was also in 2016. I was one of the first ones to say, hey, rather than me being at Open World, where mostly there's DBAs and customers, it's like, if I want to reach developers, I should be at Java 1. And I've got a really good relationship with Jedi Rimura and the Java guys. We kind of talk on a weekly basis at least. And anyway, back then, it was actually, I believe it was Stephen Chin, when he was still at Oracle. I'm not quite sure anymore who it was. But anyway, somebody told me, look, like, why don't you give a Java talk on how to work with the database? And I called it something. It was a really popular talk. I did it actually twice again. It's like supercharge your Java code for optimal database performance. And it was actually something that you would kind of call sometimes people walked up to me, it's like, everybody knows this is like the beginner's thing, right? But I would kind of go into these issues of like, don't insert row by row, don't commit every row, right? Auto commit is an abomination there. I said it in the JDBC spec. Auto commit is really, really bad from the database, because that's the one thing for sure that will make sure that you write to disk. Because when you commit, that has to go into the journal to disks. That you have a committed state. It's like not so much when you insert 10,000 rows, that just goes all into memory on the other side. So, and I measured all of that. So there's a nice little tool a colleague of mine did. So it's kind of like I showed Java code. It's up there on my GitHub still somewhere. And explained why it was slow. And,
Mm-hmm.
it was one of those talks where you basically changed just, 3-4 lines of code, and you went from like 30-second execution to like 200 milliseconds kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is very entry level. I mean, it's like there's anybody who knows a little bit about, database performance tuning or it's performance tuning in general will be not very impressed. But, not to forget, like I had colleagues coming up to me and say, why are you talking about this? We're talking about this for years, right? It's like, look, every year there's new people coming out of college, new engineers. And it's a sort of a pyramid shape. You will always have more beginners or novices than you will have experts. The experts don't need to show up to my talk. They already know it themselves. They can figure it out themselves, right? But it's like the 100 novices that are all new to this, they shouldn't have to make the same mistakes. So yes, every year you could probably repeat this topic, having new people, and it will always be a big hit because you will always have more beginners than experts, right?
And sometimes it changes, right? So I remember at the beginning, the impact of prepared statements on performance was huge. So if we prepared the prepared statements, it took a long time. So you could really measure the time, how long it took to prepare the statements. And if you cache the statements, so we did it in JDBC, actually, there was no application service back then. It was a lot faster. And meanwhile, I have to say, it is almost no difference whether you use prepared statement or not, because I assume that the databases caches this internally anyway. And also, it seems like, the relation between the database connection and the prepared statement is also not as tight as was before. So I think it is important to refresh, the knowledge, because the database changes as well.
Right, yeah, indeed. Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. It's like this, the databases are not dumb, right? And they're not around for almost 50 years if people didn't know what they were doing. So this notion of a database is slow or whatever, it's usually like you just don't know how to use the system. Which is fair.
Now I know what your computer was, your first one. And now I have to re-invite you back. And what I would like to talk about, lots of topics. So one interesting topic was actually architecture of Oracle. So why this operating system? Mm-hmm. Just, for Java developers, right, from down there up to Java and just the fundamentals, what Oracle is doing. And then we can have, a talk. What interests me is, of course, Oracle, DB, and Java. So, and also JSON, all the extensions, because not only boring SQL, but, maybe even, I don't know whether it's still around. I think Oracle bought back then Berkeley DB. Also had some chats, with the product managers. Actually, we had a chat, how to integrate with Java, and Oracle had also I remember, in-memory database back then. It was times 10. Exactly.
Yeah, both are still around. Yeah. The Oracle NoSQL database is actually not a successor, but a derivative of Berkeley DB. So it uses Berkeley DB under the covers, and it's done by the same team.
Okay.
And times 10 is still around. Yes, that team is actually just manages. It's kind of a couple of offices down that road. And of course, we also will have to talk about business logic in the database or outside. Good or
this is a very interesting topic. So it seems like you will be my recurring guest for the next 2 years. So because
I would love to,
because these are really interesting topics. Because I would say that there are no best practices except for you have to know what they are doing and explain why it is the way. And if you are able to do it, it is maintainable. If you say, okay, look, in this project, we put the entire business logic to database, and there the downside, we are depending on the database, but we are paying for the database anyway, so let's use it, right? And in exactly. This is the interesting discussion. So we will do it.
Yeah, more than happy to. It was really good already chatting with you this hour. So thanks for having me, and I'm really looking forward.
So where people can find you, your team, and Oracle Evangelist, or how to invite them to conferences, or how to get
let's see. My team is mostly scattered in Europe, the evangelists and PMs. So Andres Almire, who some Java people may know, works for me. He's in Switzerland. I have a really good SQL guy called Chris Saxon.
He was a Java champion, right? So he was the groovy guy, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. He was the groovy guy. I was the database guy. We don't really have a team page or something like that, but it's like I'm easily findable on X for those who still use it, or on LinkedIn. For that matter, my last name, if you Google it, there are not that many people with that last name, so very easily findable.
Gerald Wenzel, exactly.
Yeah, and email or Twitter, XPM is usually the best. And like my evangelist, it's like, you can reach out to me at any time if somebody wants to have somebody to talk about Oracle. As I said, I've one in the UK. I've actually the Graal VM JavaScript store procedures guys in Germany, Martin Bach, who knows a lot more about database than just JavaScript in the database. That's what he's covering. And the guy who worked on the Spring AI integration, Loic, he is in France. So Europe is super easy. The US, it's mostly me. And the ACE team is in the US. But the ACE team is managing the program, not so much flying around and talking.
It was nice. So there's a dev.java, right? So one page, and so you need the Oracle dev.oracle.
Dev.oracle. You're absolutely right. I speak with Chad this afternoon whether I can copy paste that website.
Exactly.
The code, so I don't have to do it from scratch.
Exactly. So thank you, and I'm really looking forward to the upcoming episodes, because this is the interesting talk now with I had also interesting chat with the SAP people back then. Was also similar story. They're also operating system, almost virtualization layer, and I met the guys from SAP who actually created in the garage the SAP. With one of them.
Wow.
And there was also interesting. I tried to compare JVM to the SAP. Was also very interesting talk.
Yeah. Another one is what I find really interesting is the different data models, and people think that as we said before, like everything can manage JSON now, but there's always this question of like, can Postgres really manage JSON to this?
Or what it means even manage JSON. But we should do it in the next episode. So maybe one episode just about JSON or whatever you like. So
yes.
Thank you a lot.
Well, thanks, Adam.
And see you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam.